Good afternoon. Welcome to a special crossover episode brought to you by 1010XL, presented by Injury Care Centers. My name is Gus Logue. I'm the host of Duval Rundown over at 1010XL Jaguars' YouTube page. Joining me today is Graham Marsh and Dylan Denmark of Gators Daily on the 1010XL Gators page. We decided to do a crossover episode today just to kind of break down the Gators and the Jaguars, where they're at roughly halfway through their respective seasons, what similarities the teams have, and especially their head coaches, whether the head coaches should be gone or not by the end of this season. And so I figure we could start out by just kind of breaking down where the teams are at for anyone who might be unfamiliar. So I'll start with the Jaguars. The Jags are 2-7 right now. They have a 3.3% chance of making the playoffs, according to ESPN's FPI Football Power Index. Doug Pederson just lost his second homecoming game in Philadelphia last week, and it was only a 5-point loss, but the score made it look a lot better than it actually was. The Jaguars were outgained by nearly twice as many yards as the Eagles, and the only teams that the Jags have beaten this year are a directionless Colts team in Jacksonville, where Indianapolis was without Jonathan Taylor and DeForest Buckner, and then against the Patriots in London, who's arguably the worst team in the NFL. And so it definitely seems like a lost season for Jacksonville, where hypothetically they could win out for the rest of the regular season to make the playoffs, but we haven't really seen anything from the coaching staff, especially, to give us confidence that the season can be turned around at this point. And so I think a lot of Jaguars fans are a lot more focused on draft season right now than the postseason. So what's it like over in Gatorland?
Dylan, you want first or me?
You got it. I'll react to you.
Gus, I wasn't going to bring this up, but since this is kind of a sort of a hot seat episode, are you on the hot seat as a fantasy owner?
Well, which league are we talking about? First of all, we have multiple leagues at 10.
My boy is 0-9 in the 10-10 league. For those that don't know, Trent's fantasy name is Bulky Built, and it sure is Bulky Built. Because my goodness.
Yeah. I'm taking for what's that Boise State running back? Ashton Jeanty, yeah, he's legit. I don't know. I wasn't expecting him to tank, but at this point, I'm just going all in. Yeah, I'm definitely on the hot seat.
I've been excited to throw that your way all morning. I've been just waiting. To get teed up.
Pretty much just wrap up the pod now, huh?
In Gatorland, we're talking hot seats, right? We're talking job status of the coach, where it lives. Is Napier going to be a coach next year? Is he not? Is Napier going to survive the year? Is he not? Dylan and I talked about this on our podcast this morning. Where things currently stand, both of us agreed that if we were betting men, and which I am a betting man, if we had to bet on when the season kicks off in 2025 for the Florida Gators and Coral Gables, they play Miami week 1 next year down there, will Billy Napier be on Florida's sideline? We both agreed that today we would bet yes, he will. And we both said about like 60% it's Billy, 40% the floor, or the field, I should say. It could be Kurt Signetti from Indiana. It could be Lane Kiffin from Ole Miss. Those have been the names floating around. Could be somebody else, who knows, if they end up canning him at the end of the season. Here's the reality, Gus. If we had this same podcast, a month ago, or more than a month ago, a little more than a month ago now, probably the opposite of what we're saying now would be true. We'd probably be saying the hot seat for Napier is a hell of a lot hotter than Doug. Doug made the playoffs 2 years ago. Like last year, you had the collapse, but they were 8-3 at one point. They did have a winning season, even though they ended poorly. And it was just a couple of early season losses. But now, this is a what have you done for me lately type of conversation, right? This is a stock up, stock down type of conversation. Billy Napier stock a little bit up right now. Doug Pederson's stock has not been lower as the Jaguars head coach. I think that's pretty fair to say.
Most definitely. The Gators are 4-4 right now, so just 2 wins away from a bowl game. So I think there's definitely, obviously, a chance that Billy Napier does get retained through next season. But then for Doug Pederson, his seat has never been hotter. Again, hasn't been anything shown to make people think that they could turn the season around. So at this point, it's just like a ship in sinking water, and it's a matter of when, not if, Doug Pederson is end up letting go. And so you said that you guys both think that Billy Napier will be the Gators head coach next season. And so I think that's fair to mention or good to mention. But what I really want to know is, do you guys think he should be the next head coach or the head coach in 2025? Because obviously, whether he's the head coach is out of our control and any fans' control. But just in your guys' opinion, do you think he's done enough this season, standing at 4-4 right now?
I'll say a lot of it has to do with what Lane Kiffin does on Saturday. If Ole Miss loses to Georgia, that kind of opens the door for Ole Miss to miss the playoffs more than likely. And if Scott Strickland wants to drop the hammer and say that, we're going to get Lane Kiffin, I don't like the direction that Billy Napier's done in the next, these next 4 weeks. He can do that. Now, Scott Strickland's never done anything like that in his tenure at the University of Florida. So that would be pretty surprising. And, a lot of it has to do with, like Graham talked about, the stock market of where this team has gone. You started the year, couldn't have been any worse against Miami, couldn't have won any worse against A&M, and now you've played a lot of your freshmen. Your freshmen have played really, really well, and it's not off, not crazy to say that if Lagway had played against that Georgia game, they might win that game. You look at the rankings right now, I'm not big on the rankings, but you've lost to the number 2 team. You will lose to the top 5 team in Texas this Saturday, more than likely. You lost to Tennessee at 7, and then A&M's in the top 15. So it's not like –
I think 6.
Yeah, Miami's at 4.
4. Yeah, they scooted up.
I skipped them. That's the AP. So those are, it's not like Florida's losing to, the old Vanderbilts and, the old South Carolinas. Like, these are teams that are going to be in the playoff. So I'll be surprised if Scott Strickland does drop the hammer and, goes out and gets Lane Kiffin, if Florida's able to win these next 2 games. Down the stretch in November, but there's still a lot of ball to be played, man.
Absolutely. Go ahead, Graham.
Yeah, in terms of should, Gus, like, it's weird because with Napier, I never would have envisioned myself saying what I'm about to say a couple weeks ago. Dylan and I people can go back and listen to our episodes from after the Miami game, after the A&M game. Dylan and I have fired Billy Napier about 12 times on our show. But look, here's the reality of the situation. Scott Strickland was never going to fire him or the boosters, whoever's in charge of it. That's been kind of a discussion too. But the firing was never going to happen like early in the season. Maybe mid-season if things got really, really bad and they just kept putting out performances like A&M and Miami. But more than likely, if they were going to move on, it was going to be like right before or right after the Florida State game at the end of the season. So we had talked about this earlier in the year that, as much as frustrated as we were watching the product from the field, firing Napier in mid-September doesn't allow you to fast forward to the end of November. The reality is you're going to have to sit there without a coach for like 2 months and just hope and pray that, Lane Kiffin loses enough games at Ole Miss, like Dylan mentioned, and maybe he's available, or Kurt Signetti might want to take the job or what have you. So because of that fact, that has allowed Napier to keep his cement not completely dry in between then and now. And he's making strides. He just is. It's a fact. It doesn't mean that I think Gator fans that still want him gone are wrong necessarily, or they're certainly not ridiculous for thinking that. And in the macro, it's a very fair argument to look at him and say, man, 2.5 years in, he's never broken 500, like double-digit dog to Georgia still. Like, there's a lot of reasons to justify saying it's time to move on. But for the here and now, the question to get to what you're asking me, should they? The question here and now is it best for the football program to move on and cut bait, or to ride with this thing and see where this ends up? What I've seen the last couple of weeks, what I've seen out of their freshman phenom, DJ Lagway at quarterback, what I've seen out of the young recruits that Billy Napier brought into this program, the Aiden Mizels of the world, the Aaron Gates of the world, the LJ McCray starting to come on a little bit on defense. The linebackers have played really well. Shamar James, Pup Howard, Jack Pyburn. Those guys have really started. The young backs are incredible. Jaden Ball, Jacoby Jackson, like these guys are running their ass off. So if they were able to pick themselves up off the mat and start playing really good, strong football because they believe in this guy as coach, then I have to believe that momentum is going to carry over into next season. Now, we could be having this conversation a year from now, and we could look at me and say, you're a moron for thinking that. But right now, to me, it seems like letting this train roll, letting this momentum build, and seeing where you're at year 4 and seeing if you finally, even if it was longer than Gator fans wanted it to be, they're finally getting to where they're supposed to be. I think that's the best path forward for the Gators. Now, all that said, there's still a month left of football to be played, and that could change. If they get killed a couple times again, this conversation changes.
Yeah, I think that's an interesting parallel between Billy Napier and Doug Pederson, because it's the same thing with Pederson, where it's like he was never going to get fired in the first month of the season. It didn't make sense to cut bait that early in the year. I was always saying that it was going to be after the team came back from their London trip at the earliest. And now at this point, I think it's kind of similar, where it's probably not going to happen until after the season. Maybe if there's an ugly loss in the next week or two before Jacksonville's bye week, that we could see him get cut or get fired. But the thing is that if you fire Pederson, then in all likelihood, you're probably going to end up letting go Press Taylor, his offensive coordinator, along with them, because the two are so tight-knit. Usually you just fire a head coach and then fire someone to be an interim. But in this case, it seems hard to imagine Doug Pederson being off of the team and Press Taylor remaining on the team. So if you fire Doug, you're also firing Press. And then all of a sudden, you just have your two biggest brains of the offense basically out the door. And so then you're either asking quarterbacks coach Mike McCoy to run the offense and be a head coach, or you're asking McCoy to run the offense and then maybe asking someone like special teams coordinator Heath Farwell to be the interim head coach. And so it'd be a little bit sloppy, I guess. But the thing is that while the Gators have momentum, and as you're saying, they're kind of on the up and up, and you want to see if they can carry the momentum, Jacksonville's going the opposite way, where their momentum continues to drop each week. And so the question is, do you want to cut bait because you're just worried about losing the locker room? And we saw a little bit after Jacksonville's loss in London to the Bears, Andre Sisco's comments about just feeling players around him quit and just there not being enough just effort, really. And so I don't think we've seen that issue pop up as much in recent weeks, but if the team continues to lose, then that will be an issue that needs to be considered. And so I think that Doug Pederson certainly will be fired by January, and he certainly should be, because I think the biggest draw for him as a head coach was that he was a former quarterback, that he was going to develop Trevor Lawrence, and that he was maybe not a genius offensive play caller, but a great offensive play caller who introduced new concepts, mainly the RPO, to the NFL, and was able to score over 30 points against Bill Belichick in the Super Bowl, who's probably the best defensive game planner in football history. Again, we haven't seen anything from Pederson to suggest that anything will be turned around. And what I mean by that is that there's just really no new ideas on offense. You see them add new tweaks and stuff, like a new motion here and a new blocking angle there. And so it's not like they're not changing the playbook at all, but they're still not changing the playbook enough. They're not adapting enough to the new times and not adapting enough to what defenses now know as the Pederson offense. It's just gotten really dry and really stale. And so at this point, it does make sense for Jacksonville to cut ties with Doug Pederson sooner than later. And so, Graham, you mentioned that Billy Napier, rather, is taking strides recently. And so what specifically is he taking strides in? Because is it the relationship with DJ Lagway? Obviously, that's really important in this conversation. Or is it just how you're talking about with all the freshmen and the younger guys on the team really making strides that you can see on the field?
So it's two things. Holistically, from a more macro perspective, the defense is just night and day what it was the first couple of weeks of the season. I don't know what Ron Roberts and Austin Armstrong, co-defensive coordinators, did. I don't know what they figured out other than a couple of personnel changes here and there that have worked out, and then other guys just simply picking up their play. But those first couple of weeks, I mean, it was just far, far, far too easy for offenses to just pick up big chunks of yards. And, I mean, week one, you had Cam Ward. I mean, look at it this way. Cam Ward, he's in the conversation for the Heisman. They're undefeated. They're having a great year, right? If you still look back, his signature performance is still that week one game in the Swamp. He had that crazy comeback against Cal and a couple of the games where he's played well. But that's still the game people are circling to me that was because he just ran circles around this defense. And part of that is Cam Ward is special, similar to like on Sunday, like Jalen Hurts and Saquon Barkley are special. And they're going to make special plays. We know that. But how do you limit that? You can't give them the easy stuff, right? Saquon having a backwards hurdle is crazy, but you also can't give him a go-ahead touchdown that three of us might have scored right before halftime, right? So it's that give and take, and that was a problem, a real big problem defensively early on in the season. That doesn't exist anymore. When they play special players, sometimes they make great plays. That's kind of what happened late in the game against Georgia, and I think the defense might have just been wearing down a little bit too. But, like, Aaron Gates is coming on, like, really making great plays. Like, Pup Howard, Shamar James, Jack, like I was saying earlier, they're just better on defense, like, just generally speaking. Like, there's not as many easy yards to come by. They get more turnovers. They get to the quarterback more. So that side of the ball, a switch flipped, and the light came on. Offensively, the biggest thing that's changed, Gus, is a huge complaint, and Dylan and I have complained about this time and time again on our show. And typically the comments very much agree with us. And it's been one of our biggest complaints about Billy Napier is he is an unbelievably, impressively predictable play caller. Like, insanely predictable.
So is Doug.
Right. Exactly. But for the Gators, what has improved and helped that, it's not that Napier's not gotten more creative play calling, but they're running the ball better. And when you run the ball better and you're actually getting downhill a little bit and you get 5-6 yards of carry and you can stay ahead of the chains, that just makes the play calling in general easier because you're going to keep the defense on their toes a little bit, or they're not totally sure what you're going to do. Some of the misdirection stuff can work better. Some of the play action stuff is going to work better. And then you factor in the fact that DJ Lagwitch is special. Like, it's unbelievable. I mean, that touchdown pass to Aiden Mizell, that's a Sunday throw. Mm-hmm. So it's those two things combined, I think, that's made them play better. And when I think about it with Doug, like, it's like I was saying earlier, like, it's just stock up, stock down. And basically what it comes down to as a coach, if you survive or don't survive, is when you're in the stock down times, can you survive it enough to get your stock back up? Right? I mean, if they keep Doug for the end of this year and end up keeping him next year, like, I'm sure at some point they'll start playing a little bit better. Like, I highly doubt they're just going to be this bad forever. I mean, it is the Jaguars, so, can't always guarantee that. But is there, in the coming weeks and throughout the rest of the season, are they ever going to show enough life to convince Shad Khan that it's worth seeing what next year looks like? And Gus, I want to bring up something to you that I was just looking up to double check. I was pretty sure of this. Because you mentioned you think it'd probably be after the season, right? Other than that, most likely Doug's probably going to be the coach through the last game of the year. I would tend to agree, but do you have the Lions game circled a little bit in 2 weeks?
Dude, I've got this game this Sunday against the Vikings circled because the Vikings just allowed 6 offensive points to the Colts. I know they're starting Joe Flacco and aren't like an amazing offense right now. But I'm pretty concerned that the Jags aren't going to score an offensive touchdown against this Vikings defense. And I think Kevin O'Connell is one of the best offensive minds in the league. So, yeah, I would say both NFC North opponents, the Lions in 2 weeks and the Vikings this week, both have me worried about a potential blowout, a potential embarrassing loss at home that could have Doug fired sooner than later.
So what's got me thinking about that and why I was kind of thinking the Lions is I agree with you on that Vikings game. Like, that could have a lot of unhappy Jaguar fans at the end of that game, depending on how it goes. And that's going to be another home loss. And then you go to Detroit the next week. Detroit is murdering everyone in sight right now. I mean, that game's going to be ugly in Detroit in 2 weeks. And then they have a bye. Like, the London games, I agree with you. That was kind of a check mark of like, okay, if there's a time that it sort of works out timing wise, coming back from London could be it. If there's one more before the end of the season, that would be it, in my opinion. Right after that Lions game, you've got to bye. If what we're a little bit skeptical of happens, they'll have 2 more embarrassing losses between now and then. That could be an interesting time to keep your eye on, in my opinion.
No doubt.
Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you, Gus. If you find a way to go 1-1 before the bye, and then you look after that, the schedule opens up a lot because you're playing the Titans twice, the Jets, who might not be playing for anything, the Raiders, who aren't playing for anything. And, you've played with Houston and you've played with Indy. If you're able to get a couple of those wins, and obviously the fans don't care to, bring Doug back, but Shaw is the one that makes this decision. I mean, I've thought the last couple of weeks and just, having guys on the show like Logs and D-Rock and everybody like them, like nothing would surprise me with Shad Khan if they brought both Pederson and Balky back or if they got rid of them. Like that's kind of where the point where I'm at with them.
Yeah, I think definitely the schedule has a big say in it. Obviously, it's kind of interesting actually because going into the season for both teams, everyone knew how difficult the Gators schedule was under Billy Napier and how much of a just test it was going to be throughout the entire season, having to play obviously Georgia, but obviously Texas, Miami, a whole bunch of really good teams. It was like one of the hardest schedules in college football history, it feels like. And then for the Jaguars, it was a lot more under the radar, but they did face a really, really brutal opening schedule in the first, especially the first month of the season, but really, as Denmark is alluding to, like kind of just leading up to their bye week is a brutal stretch. And then they are going to have a lot more easy opponents after that. But I think that, like, Balky, I really have no tell on. I wouldn't be surprised either way if he's retained versus fired. But Pederson is just like, again, I just don't think they've shown enough. And it's like, even if they do make it to the playoffs, they're going to limp into the playoffs and be like 9-8 for the third year in a row. And there just hasn't been enough year-over-year improvement. There's just been flashes in the midst of each season, but it hasn't been sustainable whatsoever. And so I don't think Shad Khan honestly will, even if he doesn't pay the most attention to the team, I don't think he'll see 9-8 and be happy with it, especially after his now kind of infamous statements before the season calling the 2024 Jaguars the best in team history. And so that does bring us to a good segue because I wanted to ask you guys about Scott Strickland and just how much of a role he has in Florida's football program and its relative lack of success in recent years, not just this year, because obviously with the Jaguars, Trent Baalke, the general manager, is a huge part of the equation of why the Jaguars made it to the postseason and had an awesome comeback playoff win in 2022 and just haven't really done anything since then. And so how much, I guess, blame would you guys put on Scott Strickland for just the Gators not really being as good of or as successful as a football program as we had gotten used to like a decade ago? And do you think that he will or could or should be let go in the next few months?
Dylan, go ahead because I'll talk about something in a minute that I think is
all right.
I'm assuming that his job is pretty safe, but I feel like we should still talk about it either way.
Yeah, I think his job is safe. I haven't seen anything where he's going to be let go. And you're dealing with a school president that's the interim who was the old school president. So there's a lot of things that go into that. But obviously it was his hire. He got Napier from Louisiana, and if you're a Louisiana Lafayette head coach, you're supposed to take the University of Florida job. That's not hard. If you look at I know he didn't make all these hires, but the last decade, you hired a coach that was a coordinator at Texas, a head coach at Colorado State, the head coach at Mississippi State, and now the guy from Louisiana. Those guys should take those jobs, leave those jobs, and go to the University of Florida. I don't know. We talked about this earlier too on our pod with Graham and I. I don't know how much of a say that Strickland has, and I don't know how much of a say the boosters have, because about a month ago after the A&M, how bad that loss was, it was like the boosters have all the money to pay for the buyout and yada, 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 and the boosters want Lane Kiffin. And that was then, and since then, Scott Strickland hasn't said anything, and the boosters haven't said anything. So a lot of things can change in the next 3-4 weeks. I still think the boosters have a lot of leeway. How many it is, I don't know. But I still think the boosters have a big say on what's going to happen with Billy Napier's future.
I agree, and we had to talk about the crux of the conversation we were having this morning about it. Gus was Dylan and I were like, okay, when you hear the reports that were coming out after the Texas A&M game that the boosters were ready to pay the buyout, getting this together, and they were going to be the ones making this decision. And Scott Strickland was kind of the figurehead, but he really wasn't the one pulling the strings here. So what he did or didn't want to do really didn't matter. That insinuates that they're about to fire Billy Napier and have an interim for the rest of the year and do whatever you need to do. And then at the end of the season, go all in on Lane Kiffin or whoever they think it is. Most people at the time thought it would be Lane Kiffin. But to Dylan's point, ever since then, it's crickets. Last I checked, Billy Napier's still a coach. And that leads me to believe that whoever's making that decision, be it Strickland, be it Boosters, be it a little of both, I don't think any of us that aren't in that room actually know the black and white answer on that. I don't know if there is a black and white answer. I think there's a little gray area there. That leads me to believe our initial point on all of this, that Billy Napier's cement wasn't completely dry with this. I think they were saying, look, we got a long season ahead. Let's just play it out. If it keeps going bad, then he ain't going to be the coach next year anyways. And if he starts playing better, then we'll kind of reconsider. Well, that's where we're at. And then to go above him with Scott Strickland, look, a lot of people in the last couple of years have called for Scott Strickland to be fired as well. And to Dylan's point, because of the interim president stuff, it's even less likely to happen. I don't think it was going to happen in the first place because, look, where we currently stand, if it's a question if Billy Napier is going to keep his job or not, then it's not a question if Scott Strickland's going to keep his job or not. It's not. And at a school like Florida, the other sports are awesome. And Jeremy Foley was the president before Scott Strickland, and he built a powerhouse of an athletic program, right? You had football winning titles, basketball winning titles, baseball winning titles, gymnastics winning titles, golf has won titles, tennis. Like every Florida sport is good, right? Or almost every Florida sport. And Jeremy Foley kind of built it up to that, and that became the expectations as a Gator fan. You expect not only to get wins on Saturdays in the fall, but you expect to watch the baseball team in the spring and watch them make Omaha runs, and you expect basketball to be making runs in the tournament. And we saw that with Mike White a couple years ago and the disappointment there. And that's sort of what the expectation became at Florida.
Standard.
Right. All of that said, though, this will always be true at Florida. And it's true at most SEC schools and schools like Florida. The athletic director lives and dies with the football program, right? The athletic director is not getting fired if baseball is not getting it done or if track is not getting it done. And those sports really get it done for the Gators, and I love that they do. But the reason that Scott Strickland's job is a conversation is because of the struggles of the football team the last however many years, right? And these last two hires being his, between Mullen and Napier. So, again, if we're considering hanging on to Napier and riding out year 4 and seeing what that looks like, then there's no shot Strickland's going anywhere at all. He's not. And to mirror that with the Jaguars, Gus, I was going to say something a minute ago when you brought up Balky. I believe, I don't have any insider information on this. This is just my opinion. This is just my feelings on it. We all know that Shad Khan is not a football guy, right? He's not a football. He's not a Jerry Jones type of owner that likes to make a lot of decisions himself. Shad knows that he's not a huge football guy, so he trusts the people in his inner circle to help him make the decisions that are going to move the franchise forward, correct?
Right, to a fault, but yeah.
To a fault, right. I truly believe that Shad and the way he wants to construct his franchise is having his general manager be in that inner circle of trust that helps him make decisions. That is why Dave Caldwell was kept around for so long. Dave Caldwell was the general manager for almost 10 years, and they didn't win almost anything in that time frame outside of 2017. They were below 500, but I think all of those years outside of 2017.
Yeah, in 2017, Tom Coughlin was almost the de facto GM.
Correct. All that said, it took them forever to move on. And I believe, as much as a lot of people hate it, probably myself included, I believe that that's how Shad views Trent now. I believe and that's why he made that comment about this is the most talented team the franchise has ever had. Who do you think told him that? It's the guy that built it's the guy that built the roster. It's the guy that made the draft pick, signed the free. It's that guy, right? So, I believe that when Trent told Shad that, Shad legitimately believed it. The rest of us didn't, because the rest of us understand what the 1999 team looked like, and the 1999 team would obliterate this team. My God. But because of that, I believe Trent has now, or I'm just writing on the wall again. I have no insider knowledge on any of this. I don't do any of that stuff. This is just all gut feelings for me. I believe Trent has gotten in Shad's ear about this roster is there, but the head man calling the shots can't get it done. So I think Doug's head's going to be on the chopping block. Trent Baalke's going to be able to hire the next coach, and that's how the Jaguars are going to move forward next year.
How surprised would y'all be if Baalke got fired but Doug stayed?
I'd be telling myself to wake up from a dream. I would be pretty shocked.
I think there's a less than 5% chance of that happening.
Gotcha.
Like that, the odds on that would be, you'd win a lot of money if you bet on that and it hit.
That'd be a $5 parlay to win.
Gus, as someone that because your show is focusing on the, do you think I'm off base there? Do you agree with what I'm saying there about that inner circle? What are your thoughts? What are your thoughts on that?
That's objectively correct. Is that Trent Baalke is in Shad Khan's ear saying oh no, don't worry, trust me, this roster is really good. We made the right pick, getting Trayvon Walker over Aiden Hutchinson first overall. He's definitely in his ear, and it's just a matter of whether Shad is able to kind of block that out, whether he has someone else in his inner circle who's kind of able to give him more clarity, whether he's able to just look at the team right now and say 2-7 isn't good enough. I don't care what you're whispering into my ear, but that's just not going to cut it, especially after you gave me the statement that kind of might have him embarrassed that he called this 2-17 the best in franchise history. And so, again, I feel like Doug is just a matter of when, not if, he gets let go by the Jaguars. And then Trent, as I said earlier, I wouldn't be surprised either way, because it's just a matter of how much in Shad Khan's ear he really is and how much trust he still has from Shad Khan. It's really hard for anyone except for probably 5 people in the world to know that. I certainly don't. So it's just going to be a little bit of a waiting game. But we'll see.
If the fact that the general manager and head coach are clearly so on separate pages, to me makes it all that much more likely that they won't completely clean house. They'll just axe one. And that one we all agree is going to be Doug. And if you don't think they're on separate pages, there's one guy that's on the roster right now, and he's living, breathing proof that they're not on the same page, and it's Mason Smith. Gus, if we were to break it down and look at 31 other NFL teams, there's no shot there's one other team in the league that has their second round pick as a healthy scratch on certain weeks. There's no way. I don't think he was a healthy scratch this week, but he obviously had been.
Yeah, he actually had an ankle injury in practice a couple of weeks ago, so now he is out with injury, but he has been a healthy scratch a few times. And not to mention that
that does not happen. That does not happen unless the general manager says, I hate the fact that you drafted this guy, and despite you, I'm not going to play him. That's my belief.
Even it's still on Baalke regardless, because even if that's not happening, it's just that either way, Mason Smith isn't showing enough on the practice field or in meetings or whatever the case is to be able to not only suit up on Sunday and play snaps, but just suit up at all. And so it's definitely troubling. There's obviously, that's just one example that Graham provided, but there's a lot of examples of kind of disconnect between the two figureheads, Doug Pederson and Trent Baalke. And so I think it's definitely fair to say that the least expected outcome of this situation is that both guys are retained, because even if Shad Khan has shown to be a patient and hands-off owner in the past, this is just unacceptable for the Jaguars to be where they're at, especially when you look at the offensive side of the ball. Because obviously they've had their defensive concerns and issues this season, but the Jags are middle of the pack in terms of points scored and yards per play, and I feel like they're below average in terms of third down conversion rate, red zone conversion rate, turnovers, all the important stuff. And so again, it's pretty inexcusable. And so I don't think that there will be any excuses from Shad Khan.
And I believe that what Doug has working against him is what Billy Napier has working for him, in the fact that the person that's directly above Doug, if we're calling Trent above Doug, that's kind of a gray area situation if the GM's above or if they're the same or whatever. But for this, the intense purpose of this conversation, Trent, for the sake of saving his own ass, at the end of this year is going to be looking for every possible reason to get Doug Pederson fired, I believe. Because he clearly thinks one way, Doug thinks the other way, and they're not succeeding. So one's going to have to take the fall for this. We all agree it's Doug. And Trent is going to be doing, I believe, everything in his power to make that happen. In Gainesville, I think Scott Strickland and the boosters at this point, if they are the ones that are indeed making this decision, and I think the fact that he's still the coach proves this, I believe they're looking for every possible reason to not fire Billy Napier. I believe that the fact that they have cycled through a lot of coaches, which is a part of kind of a bigger conversation, but Dylan and I have talked about that. The fact that they have cycled through a bunch of coaches in the last decade or so, the fact that it's been really, really hard for this program to find their footing at all, the fact that it does seem like there's some talent here. DJ Lagway exists. They're gaining momentum. They're playing better. And the fact that Billy is generally like a good spokesperson for the program, like he says all the right things and all that, which Dan Mullen was not. And that was a big reason he got axed early when he did. The athletic department likes yes men. Strickland, they like yes men that kind of say the company line, which Napier does. They don't – I really believe they don't want to fire him. I believe that if there's any reason in the back half of this season that he can play just well enough to justify getting a year for, I think he's going to get it.
Well, one of the other similarities between these situations is that both teams are being kind of hoisted up by their quarterbacks, right? The Gators have freshman phenom DJ Lagway, who Graham was talking about earlier. The Jaguars have former first overall pick Trevor Lawrence, who's underwhelming in his career, according to kind of the expectations when he was a college prospect, but he's still been a great NFL quarterback. And at least I'm personally in the camp that he's not really to blame. It's more about the environment around him, even if he's certainly not been perfect. And so my last question I have for you guys is just, what have you seen from DJ this season? And I guess specifically is there anything specifically that has impressed you or wowed you that you weren't necessarily expecting coming into the season? Go ahead, Denmark.
With Lagway, it's just I didn't really expect him. I expected him to play bits and pieces of every game. I kind of expected like a Tebow package back in 2006 when he had Chris Leak to run the ball, and it didn't really turn out to be that way. He played against Miami and had to play the whole fourth quarter and played well. And then you saw him play the next couple of games, and you're like, he's not ready for this kind of moment. You just kind of saw that. I think it was against A&M. Graham Mertz was clearly better. And then Mertz gets hurt against Tennessee. Lagway comes in, and Lagway throws an atrocious pick, and it's like, yeah, this is going to be an uphill battle. And it really hasn't turned out to be that way. I mean, Florida beats Kentucky, should have beaten Tennessee, and those were two really good defensive lines, two guys, all those defensive lines are going to be a first-round pick in the draft, more than likely. And DJ looked the part, and he looked really good against Georgia up until that injury. So I wouldn't say, the surprising thing is, not a lot of people understand when you go from high school to college, it is a massive jump. Because in high school, I mean, most of the time you're a coach, you look to the side, you get a play call, and you just go. You're not really doing anything at the line of scrimmage.
You're going against Dylan and me when you're playing in high school ball.
Yeah. So much of it is, pre-snap, and he's made massive jumps from that just alone, and what he's been able to do with his talent and use his legs. Hopefully, moving forward that he can fix the hamstring. Who knows if he can come back? I don't think he's going to come back for the rest of this year, although Napier said that it's not as bad as they thought it was going to be. That I guess that'd be the surprising thing is how he's handled once he got the starting job, how well he played.
The one surprising thing to me, I'd say, Gus, with Lagway is the consistent deep ball accuracy.
That was mine. But go ahead.
Yeah, clearly he was going to be special at it and have elite arm talent. He was a 5-star for a reason. He was #1 quarterback in the country, Gatorade Player of the Year for a reason. But to Dylan's point, a lot of times, you know, you're going against high school guys, like you got a lot of wide open receivers going on. I feel like you don't always know if it's really going to be that ridiculously accurate when they get to the college level and the bullets are flying and you got SEC defensive linemen coming at you. This guy, he needs more game, which the main thing that really sucks about his injury is the fact that he just needs game reps. Like he needs to play football to really get to where he can be, which is clearly a special player and eventually a Sunday player. We knew he could throw the ball deep. Anthony Richardson can throw a great deep ball. But Anthony Richardson, for every ridiculously accurate 60-yard bomb down the field, will also throw the Vanderbilt Hail Mary a couple years ago, you know, onto Broadway, you know, and it won't even be close to anybody. So a lot of times for supreme talents, that's kind of how it is. For every elite play, you'll have a what the hell was that type of play, especially when they're young and aren't super experienced. Lagway, really the one terrible – actually two. He made one really bad interception against Tennessee and one bad one against Kentucky. I think Dylan brought that up. But when any of his receivers get a step down the field, 40, 50 yards down the field, he is just money every time. I mean, he is a video game when it comes to those types of throws. That level of consistency, I didn't expect. I expected him, like I was saying, to maybe have one that's money and then one that's underthrown, gets picked or overthrown, missed, whatever. A little bit like Trevor's been this year, where Trevor sometimes gets guys with a step, will miss them, other times thing of beauty, right? Lagway's consistency down the field is the main thing where I was like, wow, that's a little bit surprising and crazy impressive.
Yeah, it was the same thing for me, where just as a more casual Gators fan, I've been super impressed with his just touch on downfield balls and consistency. Like you were saying, it's so much easier said than done to be a good downfield passer, even if you have the best arm in the league. The comparison or the example I was going to use is in Pittsburgh in the NFL, where Justin Fields, I think, probably has a stronger arm than Russell Wilson, where he can get the ball to a spot on the field quicker with higher velocity than Russell Wilson can. But as you've seen from Russell Wilson in recent weeks after he was named the Steelers starter, even if he doesn't have as strong of an arm, he does have that like rainbow deep ball and has the touch and the accuracy in the field to know how to be able to get guys in position to make plays downfield. And so to see that from a 18, 19-year-old freshman quarterback in DJ Lagway is really impressive because obviously, again, he's very athletic. He's going to be able to punish defenders anytime they're not respecting his legs in the run game on like read options. And so it's just a whole nother thing when you're also able to punish pass defenders who aren't respecting your arm. It's just, again, great to see from a freshman. And then for Trevor, I've been impressed by his poise this season because I think that's something you could say about the Urban Meyer year during his rookie season is that after every ugly loss and even after Urban was fired for ugly reasons, he got up each game, each press conference and had like the same calm demeanor and the same competitiveness game after game. And even if this season hasn't been quite as much of a disaster for the Jaguars as 2021 was under Urban Meyer, I'm still been impressed by Trevor Lawrence just like not faltering and with like the lack of pass blocking, especially earlier in the season, and then the injuries that have happened, like him having to throw to Austin Trammell in this most recent game as often as he did to Brian Thomas Jr. I think it'd be really easy to see him just kind of fold and not be able to keep getting back up play after play, even after bad plays, which he certainly had his fair share of. But so I've been impressed, just continued to be impressed by his poise and the fact that he continues to get up and try to just will the Jaguars to a game or to a win game after game. So do you guys have any thoughts on Trevor Lawrence or anything else in the Jaguars before we wrap up this episode?
Nobody's going to get traded, are they?
Go ahead, sorry.
No, I said nobody's going to get traded, are they, next 3 hours, you don't think?
No, I heard some Devin Lloyd rumors earlier in the season.
Man, ain't nobody giving him, man. Ain't nobody trading.
I'd be surprised. And there was the rumor of Trevor Etienne going to Dallas or some team, maybe Travis Etienne. I mean, but yeah, like since he's under contract through next season. So as I was saying on the last Duval rundown show, I'd be pretty surprised if that happened. So no, to answer your question, I'm not expecting any trades.
Yeah, I'm the same way. The Etienne's the only one that's got a value. I don't think he's going anywhere.
Yeah. I agree with you, Gus, on Trev. Like, the fact that he's really never in his tenure, that I can remember at least, ever said anything really stupid in the bumpy to say the least 3.5+ years now, that he's been the quarterback is really impressive by itself.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, how do you get through 2021 and never say anything that is controversial or a problem or whatever, right? I mean, that's crazy. So, yeah, I agree. And, I even see it on the field, Gus. Like, when you just look at body language and the coach's body for the Jaguars, the coach's body language and some of the players, like, it always feels like Trevor's the only guy. It feels like he's the only adult in the room, and it feels like he's the only guy that when adversity hits, I tweeted about this on Sunday during watching the game when things weren't going well, when it was 22-0. It always feels like Trevor's the only one that's like, all right, let's go, guys. Like, let's pick it up. Like slapping guys' butts, high-fiving dudes, like trying to get people going. Like, and Doug just kind of sits there and looks at the play sheet, even though he's not going to call the plays. And that kind of stuff drives me crazy, Gus. And when the Gators were struggling earlier, that really aggravated me about Billy when he never seemed to show emotion. I know that one of the things that Doug has been praised about as a head coach is his demeanor and the fact that he's pretty consistent and stays the same. Trevor's talked about that a lot. I get that. But sometimes you got to show some type of emotion, bro. And you don't need to be fire and brimstone, and you don't got to be, ripping people every other play. And I'm not saying that. Like, you don't have to be inside. But every once in a while, man, like, act like you're alive. I mean, my God, it drives me nuts, man, watching the game. It's like, I mean, it's 22-0, and the offense is coming back on the field. I remember this vividly. I forget what drive it was. I think it might have been the drive they ended up going down and scoring that first one when Trevor did the QB sneak to score. Trevor's the only guy that's like before the drive started being like, all right, guys, let's go. Let's like whatever. And it's like, man, can I not have the coaches be like invested? Like, it doesn't feel like they obviously are. I'm not saying they're checked out, but like, you get what I mean? Like, just have a little fire or something, man. Like, come on.
Yeah. I think a lot of times across sports, you see that teams take on the identity of their coach. Something that we've seen, I think, in Detroit in recent years with the Lions and Dan Campbell and like their whole toughness mantra. And obviously every football team probably does want to be tough and have that type of identity. But that's been one thing that I've been harping on Doug Pederson about in recent weeks is his lack of an identity, where he's been asked about his identity multiple times in recent weeks. And he's like, oh, well, we don't have one right now because like winning kind of creates an identity, but right now losing is our identity. It just gives non-answers. And it's like, you got to have something to fall back on and some kind of just characteristic to your team and to your coach that you can say, this is who we are. Again, to just be able to fall back on, especially in hard times. And Doug doesn't seem to have that. He doesn't seem to have the energy that you would really like to see from a football coach on the sidelines. And so, yeah, to wrap up.
Yeah, like really quick last thing, I know we're trying to wrap. Like, I'm not saying be Nick Sirianni. Like, yeah, he's just an emotional baby, and he's also a moron.
Yeah.
I'm not saying that, but like, I think you mentioned Dan Campbell. Like, Dan, like, you can clearly tell he's into it, and he like wants his players to succeed. And there's just certain coaches that just never show anything, and Doug is one of them, and it drives me nuts. All right, rant over.
All right, I was just gonna ask to wrap up. What's your guys' predictions for the rest of the Gators season? Do you think they get to 6 wins and make a bowl game? Do you think that they're going to lose out and Billy's going to be fired? What are your expectations?
They'll be free shoes at the end of the year because they're terrible, and I think that's about it. I thought they have a chance about beating LSU or Ole Miss, but not with a third string. Not with that quarterback.
But Dylan and I disagreed about this morning because I think Lagway is going to come back. Not this week. He ain't going to play this week. That's gamesmanship when Napier was acting like he might play this week. That won't happen, and probably not the week after. But I do think maybe your Ole Miss game, you could possibly get him to play. I don't. They're always ambiguous about that in college, but I think they're going to get 2 wins. Like they're going to beat Florida State because Florida State is terrible.
Yeah,
and then,
that one's easy to chalk.
How ironic would it be if Florida beat Ole Miss? I think they could win one of those 2 games though. Even with a third string, they had Georgia on the ropes. I believe in it.
It'd be so Billy Napier.
But I'm saying it now.
It would be so Billy Napier for him to beat Ole Miss with a third string quarterback, Logue come back against Florida State and lose to Florida State. That would be so Florida Billy Napier. It can happen too, but I don't think it's going to happen.
I guess it does depend big time on DJ Lagway's injury. He's not out for the full season, but I mean, correct me if I'm wrong. It's still kind of iffy on when he will end up coming back, whether it's this week or against FSU or not at all. So yeah, appreciate you boys for joining me on this crossover episode. We'll see how long Billy Napier and Doug Pederson are able to hold on to their jobs for. It'll be fun to watch the respective young quarterbacks for the rest of the year, even if neither of these teams are going to win a championship. But thanks again, guys. That was Graham Marsh and Dylan Denmark. I'm Gus Logue. This has been a 1010XL crossover episode. Catch you guys next time.